So my editing process tend to go back and forth between Photoshop and Lightroom. I use Lightroom primarily to do color adjustments, but then Photoshop for most major editing processes. So for example, this one here, there's some really blown out white light. Sometimes I like to make them really graphic and bright, but I think in this scenario, I'll bring back a little bit more details into the highlights. In the shadow, I want to bring the shadow really dark to make this really a really graphic light against dark. But it can't be too dark because I want the figure still to be visible against this dark background. So I drop the shadow as well as drop the highlight to bring out more details into those light patterns and a bit of clarity. And with Lightroom, there's a feature to enable profile correction. So I'm going to select that and it automatically adjusts to the camera lens that I was using. From Lightroom, I just open it into Photoshop and I'm just going to remove the most offending blemishes on the ground. I just go to Edit Fill and Content Aware Fill, and this will automatically remove the areas that I've lassoed with the lasso tool. I can do many spots at the same time, just to save time. And it doesn't have to be super perfect because it's still the ground, but I think by removing these distracting elements, it will make for a much cleaner image and just a much more graphic, satisfying image. So I'm just highlighting these areas again. I hold down my Shift key so I can do a multi-select on these area with the lasso tool and Edit Fill Content Aware, and magically they will disappear. If you are selecting multiple areas, sometimes the Content Aware tool doesn't work as you intended to, so just have to pay attention that it's not messing up some other areas. I think everybody's definition of how much editing is acceptable. For me, I don't want to take it out of reality, but then, you know, I'm not a documentary photographer. I don't have to adhere to the rules of not photoshopping or not editing. I just create what is necessary or what I feel is sufficient to tell my story. So it's personal, and for you, it may be different. Another thing is that maybe at the top of the image, I feel it's not enough contrast. So what I do is actually make another layer, and I will pump up the contrast at the very top of the image, and I will mask that off. And I will use the masking tool and use the gradient tool. I mask the layer that I just darkened and then bring it back so you can see it has a little bit more contrast at the top of the image. Because I just want this pattern to continue across the entire image of these light dashes. And maybe do a final levels adjustment to bring even more contrast. And I feel this one is a pretty good image, so I will save it. I just save it as a JPEG. And another question that people always ask me, like what image size should I use when I upload to Instagram? There is really no best practice, but for me, I usually just resize it smaller, maybe to 16 or 1800 pixel width. And I would just save as JPEG. And this is a smaller version. So I will then bring that to my phone where I do the final upload to Instagram. This next one is one where there's going to be a little bit more editing. I'm going back to Lightroom, and this is where I make my initial round of color adjustment and lens adjustment. So I'm in the develop mode. I'm going to select my lens correction, enable profile correction, and it automatically selects my lens setting, which is the Sony 2470. As you can see, this setting sort of fixed the barrel effect, the kind of curvature onto the image. It also washes out a little bit of the image, so you gotta pay attention to that. And I can see that the dark areas is quite dark, so maybe I'll bring up to bring back a little bit of the details in the dark area. Just a tiny bit. And then I'm bringing down the highlights so that I can retain a little bit more detail in the bright areas of the photograph. And I usually use this white balance tool, this automatic white balance tool, and you see how the initial adjustment comes up as I select, maybe make this, have the white balance based on this neutral area of the concrete. So I sort of use this picker and then put it onto the concrete. And you can see the image warms up quite a bit, which I do like the warmer tones. I'm just trying different areas and see where, as you can see, if a more yellow area, the image becomes more blue because it assumed that area is the white balance. It's best for you to select a gray area as your white balance, and it will give the most true to life coloration. So this concrete area was probably the most neutral area from that scene, and you can see that it gives the most realistic rendering of the light. I'll bring up a little bit more clarity to bring a little bit more sharpness and pop. So overall, I feel like this is good. The brick is a little dull looking, so maybe I'll bring out a little bit more red on the brick. So by going to the red or orange and then just bring up the saturation. So I'm opening it up in Photoshop. I want to fix these converging lines. You can see that the lines are sort of converging at the bottom, so I'm going to straighten them out. First thing I dropped a couple of vertical lines along where those lines I will fix. You can see here. I dropped one line here and one line on the right edge, maybe one more here. I just pull in from the roller from the left, and you have to have the roller activated in order to pull these lines in. To bring up the roller, you do Command R. When you remove the ruler, you really don't have an area to pull these lines out of, but when you do Command R, you can actually pull onto the ruler and pull into the image, and that will create a line. You can also drag them out of frame. You can also clear them out by do Command semicolon, and that will just momentarily remove them off the screen so you can see the image. Okay, so I'm going to use the transform tool. So edit, transform, and then do a distort. So after I do that, I hold down the Shift key and I drag these corners so that the vertical line in the photo is straight, follows the guidelines that I dropped down. So I'm going to remove the guides so you see what it looks like. It's still not completely straight. So I'm going to go back and try to distort one more time. So both the lines on the right and the left are parallel to the guides. And you can see the before and after. Okay, so I'm just going to make a copy of this layer because I want to work on a copy of it just in case I messed up. I still have the original version right below. I can revert to it. So again, using the fill tool, the content aware tool, I'm just going to select the offending items on the screen and then just lasso them. I can do multiple items to make this workflow a lot quicker. Okay, I'm going to remove a couple more things down here. I like to have a very clean geometric image, so I tend to not have these smaller elements. Some people may balk at that, but again, it's a personal decision. I'm not documenting reality, so I have the freedom to interpret it in the way that I want to. These objects here, it's harder to use the content fill. For example, if I do this, I lasso the object and I just do a content fill. You can see, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can see it kind of mess it up a little bit. You see all the lines that are, so I don't think that's as effective. So I use a lasso to just sort of select an area below. And I'm selecting maybe an area of 2 brick wide and 5 bricks high. And it doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to blend this into the area above. So I'm going to cut and paste, Control C, Control V. Okay, so I move it up and you can see it doesn't quite line up. So I do transform, distort, so it can be repositioned. And you can see the edges. This is kind of hard to tell because this pattern is pretty random. So this is even pretty good. I can stop here, but I'm going to blend it in a little bit so it gives a more realistic rendition. So I'm going to select the item, and then by command click on the layer of the items that I just cut out, it create a lasso around the selection, and I'm gonna hit the mask tool, which is down at the bottom here. So basically create a mask around it, and I'm going to just blend the edges in. So I just kind of brush, using the gradient to brush in to the mask to bring back some of the original brick to blend with my new selection and to make it more seamless. So the edges are soft and you don't notice where it begins and where it ends. So that's what I would do here for this other exit sign. I would make a selection. And how many brick high doesn't really matter. And I can even choose a selection that's further away. So you can see this area becomes super clean. All you see is just the brick, which is really nice. I'm gonna do a final cropping. Just remove that exit sign at the top. And I think that's gonna be pretty good, okay? So I'm gonna save that as a JPEG, and then also make a smaller version so that I can upload to Instagram. I'm gonna make the width 1800 pixel, and then so that it's a smaller JPEG, so that when I bring over to my phone, it's not a huge 24 megabyte file. It may be like a 1.5 megabyte file. It's very personal how much editing you want to do to your image, but of course with Photoshop, there's so much you can do, and it's really up to you how much you want to utilize the tool. And next, we will be editing some of the nature shots that we've taken.